members of the Senate were being targeted and threatened with violence in order to get these official proceedings obstructed. Other big news this week, speaking of election rigging, is the debate about the January 6th prosecutions. The Justice Department has stretched a law that was passed after the financial crisis of 2008, or maybe it was before 2008. Maybe it was the Enron scandal. It might have been back before then. Sarbanes-Oxley, which is a regulation of the private sector, supposedly to protect us, right? But essentially, it makes it. They add more federal sanctions and law and crimes to messing with official proceedings related to financial crimes. Now, for the first time in the history of the law that had been around for at least 20 years plus, they started prosecuting January 6 demonstrators or people involved in the disturbance for being involved in trying to obstruct an official proceeding. And the courts have kind of been confused about that, meaning one judge said in the District of Columbia, well, that's not what the law is designed to do. You're applying the wrong law here. It doesn't apply in these circumstances. And of course, the Biden Justice Department got a bunch of other judges to say otherwise. And the Supreme Court was skeptical enough is that they brought it up almost immediately, practically speaking. And they had hearings on it earlier this week. And I'm glad there were hearings or oral arguments on it. And I encourage you to listen to the full oral arguments because it highlights how the Biden Justice Department, and it exposes the political abusive prosecutions of the January 6th defendants. As I commented here about the Justice Department Solicitor General under Biden, she was doing backflips before the Supreme Court to explain why leftist demonstrators weren't prosecuted as January 6th defendants were. Because this law related to official proceedings or obstructing official proceedings, this is the first time it's been applied to First Amendment-related demonstrations or anything like that. Even though you had leftists engaged in demonstrations that arguably violated the law as applied by the Biden Justice Department for the first time. The point being, they weren't prosecuting leftists, and they were prosecuting Trump supporters. And the Justice Department was before the Supreme Court trying to explain how they probably will never prosecute leftists under this law. You know, Justice Sotomayor, you know, she said something crazy. She falsely stated, as I said in the tweet, there is no precedent for people trying to stop a proceeding violently. And that's simply false. The Kavanaugh hearings were repeatedly and violently obstructed. I witnessed it in person. Now, I went to both Kavanaugh hearings. There were two sets of Kavanaugh hearings. There were that was the first set that was the traditional hearing of a confirmation hearing, I should say. And you wouldn't believe what was going on. I witnessed it. I was sitting in the hearing room. The left would come into the hearing room. They'd be sitting in the public section. And they'd get up and start screaming. And the police would have to remove them. It was violent. There was violence going on in the Senate office buildings. I knew about it. I heard about it. Members of the Senate were being targeted and threatened with violence in order to get these official proceedings obstructed and to derail the Kavanaugh hearings and the nomination in its entirety. It continued in the second set of hearings where the rather odd lady who falsely, in my view, accused Kavanaugh of sexual assault, and they had that show trial hearing of Kavanaugh. Now, those hearings were a bit more calm in the hearing room, but on the outside, the left was just running amok in the Senate. Cornering senators. It was a terribly threatening, intimidating, and quasi-violent atmosphere. My point being, many of those people could have been prosecuted. They didn't have any right to be there. under the rules for demonstrations within an office building like the Senate office buildings. They weren't prosecuted like the January 6ers were. I saw it. I mean, I wasn't directly threatened, but I certainly recognized there was an air of violence around it. And certainly the senators must have been nervous. They obviously were nervous. I was talking to a reporter the other day who was asking me about whether, because I had called on repeatedly in the CPAC speech I made, that the next honest president should pardon the January 6ers. And the reporter said, well, you think all of them? I said, yeah, all of them. Because the whole process has been compromised and it was political. So is it possible that someone committed a crime that should have been prosecuted at the federal level? Of course it's possible. Was this Justice Department engaged in a way that could ensure to me or any other sensible person that such crimes were being prosecuted justly and justice was being fairly administered, even for criminal defendants who seemingly did something wrong? No. And that's why Trump, or whoever is elected who's the next honest president, and hopefully maybe a Democrat will come to a sensible conclusion like this, should pardon everyone. If they're in jail, let them out. And frankly, the Supreme Court hearings this week highlighting the Justice Department's abuse of process, misuse of the law, rewriting the law to try to put their political opponents in jail. By the way, two of the charges against Trump that the Jack Smith gang is trying to use to put Trump in jail are covered by the Supreme Court hearing or the Supreme Court case right now. I mean, look at Elon Omar and her, she was encouraging, or at least Maxine Waters, remember, was encouraging people to threaten and intimidate and harass Trump officials back during the Trump administration. And there's now these leftists disrupting college campuses, threatening and attacking Jews, breaking the law repeatedly. And then Elon Omar is trying to defend this leftism. Let's go to this tweet I put out about her. I have to walk up a little closer. I can't read. Conflict of interest. Elon Omar's daughter suspended from Columbia sister school following congressional hearing. The Minnesota congressman repeatedly downplayed violations by anti-Israel protesters and accused the school of unfairly targeting pro-Palestinian activists. So there you have a far left, as far as I'm concerned. Elon Omar is a communist defending her fellow communist terrorist supporters, and of course she's going to defend her daughter. I don't blame her for that. Sitting in the House. And did you see all the news this week with these terrorist left-wing supporters? Left-wing terrorist supporters, how's that? Shutting down our airlines, airports, closing roads. Where's the Biden administration? Where's Secretary Pete Buttigieg, the awful transportation secretary who spends all of his time talking about racist roads? We had a coordinated effort to shut down our national infrastructure by the left. Zero response from the Biden administration that I could see. And at the same time, the same Justice Department is before the Supreme Court talking about how they are, admitting to essentially stretching the law to target their political opponents under the excuse of January 6th. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.